Okay. Hello, everyone. We're excited to have you here and want to welcome you to Flatiron School's Don't Get Schooled by Cyber Criminals. My name's Catherine Sommerfeld, and I'm the Director of Campaigns and Events here at Flatiron School. Part of my team's job is hosting free webinars like today's event to give you the opportunity to meet some of our instructors and get a better feel of the Flatiron School experience. Again, a quick reminder, we'll be using the chat as our main source of communication, so make sure to set that little blue button from host and panelists to everyone so we can chat together. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our guests today. Michael is here representing our admissions team. And if you have any admissions specific questions, please drop them in the chat. He will be sharing some links and fun stuff for you. And Gilles is here representing our cybersecurity team. Go ahead and take it away.
Awesome. Well, it's a pleasure to meet you. My name is Gilles, and we are going to get started with our presentation today. So just give me 1 second to start sharing, make sure I could see the chat. And we will get started. Give me 1 second. Hold on. There we go. All right. So once again, welcome everyone, and looking forward to getting started with this event. Today we're going to have a lot of fun talking a little bit about tips and tricks to make sure you guys are not fooled by any cyber criminals, and we're going to go through some common strategies we end up seeing that cyber criminals employ in order to launch attacks. So to start, let me introduce myself. So my name is Gilles, and I am a cybersecurity instructor here at Flatiron School. In the past, I've worked as a paralegal, and I've also worked as an investigator. And I am also a graduate of the Flatiron School Cybersecurity Analytics program. As somebody that not only went through the program and am passionate about this industry, I spend a lot of time labbing on my own and learning more and more about cybersecurity in order to make this a more efficient and fun skill set for myself. And I want to share this enthusiasm with all of you. So by the end of today's session, you guys are going to be able to define cybersecurity, define artificial intelligence, which has been getting a lot of press and interest recently. You guys will be able to recognize common attacks against individuals and how to defend against them. And you'll be able to implement security best practices. These are things that will ensure that you guys are safe when not only you're browsing the internet, but you're making sure that you're not going to get, your password stolen or anything horrible like that. So let's get started. Now, one thing I want to let you all know is that I will be monitoring the chat. So if anybody has any questions or curiosities while I'm talking, please feel free to write it in the chat. And as Catherine said at the beginning, make sure to select everyone so that I can see it as well. Okay. So first off, what is cybersecurity? Now, fundamentally, cybersecurity is the act of protecting the CIA triad of our property, data, and infrastructure. Now, the CIA triad is the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of this information. Now, confidentiality is basically private info. Let's be clear here. This includes social security numbers, credit card numbers, right? Routing numbers, etc. Anything you guys think private, we want to think is private. You want to make sure that you're protecting that. Integrity is the freedom, I'd say, from having your data and information changed without your knowledge. So in protecting the integrity of your data is ensuring that people can't just get on your system and start changing things without your knowledge. And finally, the availability is the ability to keep things up and running. Now, in your case, as individuals, availability will not apply to you as much. This is more for businesses where you end up needing that uptime in order to ensure that your business is functional and able to make money. Okay. But always when we think of cybersecurity, you want to understand that the CIA triad is synonymous with that protection. You want to be able to protect all your private information and ensure nobody has access. Okay. Now, always remember that these principles apply in the personal life as well as in the business world. Okay. Everything that you believe you need to protect in the real world, you're going to need to protect in the business world. And with the rise of AI, just know that these things are going to get much harder and harder to protect. Okay. AI makes business able to work faster. It allows for consistency in it allows for efficiency when it comes to getting work done, but it also allows for the efficiency of hackers' work to get done quickly. And that's why you want to make sure that when we think about AI coming out, we're thinking ahead to the dangers that might come forward. So what is AI? Now, AI, by definition, is the ability for a computer to mimic and behave in ways that are generally associated with humans. Okay. This includes speech recognition, decision-making, cognition, and creativity. Now, many of you guys have seen already on Instagram and the other social media sites, AI art, for example. These are the type of intelligences that we're referring to, this ability for computers to mimic and pose as human cognition. And that's one fascinating aspect of cybersecurity and technology recently that is becoming more and more interesting. It is the ability for these computers to emulate human language. One tool you guys may have noticed and used is ChatGPT. ChatGPT is able to emulate human language and give the appearance that it's not only thinking, but, able to communicate with you. And we're going to utilize that tool later in this lecture today. But it's one of those things that it makes everything more efficient. It allows us as people and professionals to be able to work faster and be able to get things done in a more efficient way. And the use of these language models like ChatGPT, Bard, has given rise to this idea that AI is coming and it's already here. Now, I want to give everybody a second to ask any questions. Feel free to write in the chat if you guys have any questions about AI and security so far. All of these things are important, and I want to make sure that, if you have any questions, I'm giving you guys the time to ask. If you don't feel comfortable asking right now, you guys could always ask at the end. So moving on just a little, AI, like all tools, has the ability to make things more efficient, right? And that efficiency not only affects us, but also affects the abilities of hackers to be able to behave in a more efficient manner. Okay, building malware with AI has become significantly easier. Okay, and it allows for the ability for hackers who may not be as knowledgeable to be able to create tools and techniques that they weren't able to create before. Okay, AI also makes it so that even non-English speaking hackers are able to write an email, for example, in English, right? And it's fascinating how these language models allow you to be able to emulate things that you weren't able to emulate in the past if you couldn't do it in the future. Now, AI has a lot of things that we should be excited about. It allows us to learn things like technology in a much easier way. And it allows us to even make our security tools more advanced. But keep in mind that this also makes it so that attackers have that ability as well. Now, moving on just a little, right? The point of this lecture today is really to protect ourselves as individuals. And there's a fundamental difference between business security and personal security, which is that businesses generally have the resources to be able to protect themselves against specific attacks. We as individuals don't have those resources. And as such, it also means that hackers don't have as much of an incentive to hack us as well. Generally, when hackers hack, it's for some sort of gain. And when it comes to hacking individuals, they're specifically focused on small gains that they can get on a large scale. And as a result, you see a general low-cost style of attack that generally occurs against individuals. So one attack that's very common is social engineering. Now, social engineering is an umbrella term for multiple attacks. But why I bring this up immediately is that this is the most common way an individual gets hacked. They get manipulated, right? Persuaded, and led into a position where they're going to get their data exposed, and where they may voluntarily expose their own data in a way to placate this attacker. Generally, when it comes to social engineering, they utilize psychological tactics that allow for consistency when it comes to this, and it ends up being a consistent revenue for hackers. Okay. On the other side, another very common attack against an individual would be credential stuffing, taking hacked passwords, credentials, emails, phone numbers, and utilizing it to gain access to accounts that shouldn't be public. Okay, so a prime example would be Instagram. You guys may have received messages from people saying, hey, click this video I saw of you, right? Now, you may believe that this is a friend of yours, but then you find out that the friend had their account hacked. And the reason they're sending this email is to gain access to more accounts. And plenty of times you'll have a big attack like the Target breach, where a lot of personal data was exposed in passwords. And if people are reusing passwords, they can utilize those credentials and try it on multiple accounts. And what ends up happening is that people will end up losing access to their accounts because of this attack. So we're going to go into more detail on both of these attacks, but just to be clear, the danger of both of these attacks stem from common human psychology, which is why, let's not get schooled by them. Let's make sure that we're ahead of the curve so we don't get hacked in ways that could be prevented. Now, to start, I want to just go and deep dive into credential stuffing quickly. Now, credential stuffing generally happens when hackers are able to access the dark web. They pull passwords that were associated in breaches, and they try it on a person's multiple accounts. So let's say I get your LinkedIn password. If there was a LinkedIn breach, I would attempt that LinkedIn password on Yahoo, Gmail, Capital One, Chase, Citibank, etc. I try every account. And if you happen to be reusing your password, I'll gain access to multiple accounts. Okay. And the danger with AI is that AI can help you write a script to make this task automated. Whereas, AI has control, specifically ChatGPT has control, so you can't just tell the AI to hack for you. That doesn't mean you can't have the AI be complicit by having it write the script for you. Okay. And as a result, when it comes to hacking of this style, this is where AI becomes incredibly dangerous. It allows a hacker to now test multiple email accounts or multiple credentials on multiple different accounts through the use of scripts. Now, luckily, this attack is preventable, right? Two real ways to prevent it. The first is to not reuse credentials. And I always recommend a password manager for this. If you use a free password manager like Bitwarden, or even a paid one like NordPass or LastPass, you're much safer than if you're just memorizing all your passwords. Generally, the form of memorizing people use is just reiterating the same password from account to account. And as a result, you want to make sure you're paying close attention to your use of passwords. You want to make sure you're not reusing them. Secondly, multi-factor authentication helps you. Having, when you would log in, having either a text message or a one-time pass or things like that allow for the prevention of credential stuffing attacks. The danger still remains, though. Even with MFA, if you're reusing all your passwords, there might be an eventual account where you can gain access to. And that's why you need to be really, really careful and make sure you utilize a password manager. Now, in the case of social engineering, and we're going to move on from credential stuffing a little bit, but in the case of social engineering, you don't see that same simplicity in defense. Okay, with credential stuffing, it's understood that reusing passwords really is the fundamental weakness that leads to that type of breach. But social engineering, on the other hand, you don't see this. It's much more persistent, much more common, and they utilize multiple mediums to get this. Now, generally, all cybersecurity professionals know that there are 6 principles that lead to social engineers hacking you. 6 psychological principles that we all can fall victim to. And it's important to pay attention to these because if it will work, for example, if a used car salesman can use this on you, then a hacker can easily use this on you. So it's important to keep in mind that these principles work on everybody and that they will work on you too. So one common psychological principle used is reciprocity. There is a psychological principle called the foot in the door phenomena, where someone will do a small favor, generally a minor one for you, and they're going to expect something in return. As this grows, they're going to utilize that favor to continue asking for bigger and bigger favors later on. All it requires is that foot in the door, that one favor, to allow access to more and more favors from you as the victim. Now, keep in mind, reciprocity is an incredibly effective tactic. Generally, they'll make it something minor, like, oh, let me help you with this, or let me tell you, oh, hello world, is it me you're looking for? That's funny. It'll come up with many favors that you can utilize in order to keep gaining more and more footholds within somebody's personality. Now, the thing about reciprocity is that the way to stop this is to just not allow someone to do a favor for you at all. Okay, don't even allow that little bit. Now, and one common ability with reciprocity is free, very easy example, free samples, right? In the mall, they utilize this tactic all the time. You go, they give you a free sample of a burger, and now they've roped you in. And all they need to do is continue to offer free things or convince you that, hey, we gave you this free thing, so now you should return the favor. So that principle of reciprocity is very commonly used. So just keep in mind that this is one of those psychological principles that's always present. The next is commitment. Now, generally, sometimes you'll get somebody in this by asking them to listen to your short presentation. This one is very, very common. So a prime example is you go to, let's say you've flown to Cancun, right? Now, anyone who's ever been to Cancun will know that in the airport, there's going to be people offering you things, and they'll offer you all these sales, so long as you commit to attending their presentation. Generally, these presentations are scams or some sort of timeshare deal. And when you're dealing with somebody like this, you feel guilty if you don't honor the commitment you've promised them. And this is another example similar to reciprocity, but the difference is they ask you to make the initial commitment. They play on your failure or your inability to have that moral dissonance, feeling guilty about with yourself that you didn't follow through with something you committed to do, which is why this tactic works and is very effective. Okay. The next, we've got a social proof. This one just using peer pressures. Look at all these people who like our product. Many of you guys might recognize this. Generally, you see rating scales in order to utilize and take advantage of this social proof ability. It's something that is very effective, and which is why all salespeople utilize social proof when they're trying to get somebody to lower their guard. The next is authority. I don't know how many of you guys have heard of the Milgram shock experiment. Strongly recommend you look into it. But people are willing to obey authority figures even when it is a reprehensible ask. Okay. And as a result, authority is one way hackers utilize psychological pressure to get you to do things. One common thing hackers have done when they're penetration testers is wear specific attire in order to convince you to do something, right? Someone will come in pretending to be an engineer, wear a full jumpsuit, and say, hey, I'm here to access your server rack. And then you find out they're not that person. One common thing I've also seen people do is dress up like the Verizon person to gain access to a building or present to be Amazon. These are all different ways they pretend to be authority figures to gain access to places they shouldn't have access to. The next thing is liking. One thing you guys may notice when you're dealing with a salesman is that they're very charismatic. They're likable, and they utilize that likability to get you to do things. And a lot of the times, this becomes a very effective tool at lowering the guard of a victim. And finally, my favorite is scarcity. We all know those websites that have a countdown, right? That is playing up on that scarcity principle. Limited time only. We're going to run out. Get your, stocks now, right? All of these tools are just methods of getting you to have that sense of urgency. That urgency will cause you to make a quick decision rather than take your time. And that's why it's very important to think through before you make purchases and not allow that urgency mindset to creep in. Now, when it comes to social engineering, a lot of these attacks can be done from multiple vectors. Unlike a regular sort of salesman type situation, social engineering can be through email, phone, text, websites, etc. All of these are possible through different phishing attacks, and they're used to trick users into either downloading viruses or harvesting credentials. I'm going to show you guys examples on not only how this is done, but I'm also going to show certain examples of messages that you should look out for when you're going to get phished. Like if you've received a phishing email, you'll notice trends in not only the type of speech, but how they end up reaching out to you when they want something. Generally, this is called phishing. And in the case, generally phishing will refer to email, but there's also smishing, which is text phishing, vishing or voice over phishing or phone calls. And lastly, websites that are just clickbaity. And the point of those websites is to download things that are dangerous. Another social engineering attack that's very common is shoulder surfing. Okay, this is a method of looking over someone's shoulder to gain access to someone's passwords or other sensitive information. I don't know how many of you guys know, but I am a New Yorker. I take the New York City Transit every day. And as a result, when I am taking the train, I utilize a privacy screen. Okay, and the reason I do that is because people could access passwords just by looking over my shoulder. This social engineering attack is very common. And it's one of those that, as individuals, we need to be careful of. You could get privacy screens on Amazon. They're very cheap. And they will help prevent, other attacks, prevent attacks like this from happening, where people won't be easily able to access your phone or your bank accounts just because they looked over your shoulder. Finally, it's the fundamental attack of piggybacking. Now, piggybacking is quite common in New York City. You can expect that if you live in an apartment in New York, someone's going to attempt to gain access by following you into your building. Always keep in mind to not let these people in. They're playing up on your niceness to allow you in. And the reality is that you don't know this person. And this is a fundamental danger. They could come in, steal packages. They could come in and do a whole bunch of stuff. And piggybacking is a very common way that businesses get breached. All it takes is someone to assume that, this person's not malicious, and they'll let you right in. which is why when it comes to social engineering attacks, you really need to be skeptical and pay attention to the fact that people are going to be able to hack you. Okay. So moving on just a little, I want everyone to keep in mind that these happen in multiple meetings. You can expect that it's going to happen by email. That's the most common. Text, WhatsApp, social media, wherever they can communicate with you verbally, you can get hacked. And that's why it's important when you think about social engineering to recognize that every medium or platform is an attack vector that they can access. Okay. So always remember when it comes to social engineering, every vector is a possible in for a hacker. And that's why it's important to pay attention to these things and make sure that when you receive an email, you don't immediately click it and you don't immediately assume that these attacks are going to pull through and gain, that these attacks aren't innocent. Immediately assume that if you got it and you didn't ask for it, it's a hack. Now, fundamentally, where there are some best practices that you can do to protect yourself. And after these slides, I'm going to show you an example of how a hack can actually materialize. And I'm also going to show you some examples of phishes that are very easy to spot and see. But I want you to remember this set of best practices to make sure that you guys can protect yourself and ensure that you guys don't get hacked. Okay. So first things first, if you didn't ask for it, don't open it. Okay. This is very tempting. A lot of these emails are going to say things like urgent, right? Your Google account has been hacked, or, we've left an Amazon package. If you don't pick it up by this date, you're going to have problems. If you didn't ask for it, don't open it. You can always go into those specific apps. If you've ordered from Amazon, for example, you could always check the Amazon app. You don't need to click a link in a text or email in order to ensure that the package was delivered or not. So just keep in mind, if you didn't ask for it, don't open it. Secondly, as regular individuals, I always recommend you guys use a password manager. You want to make sure you're utilizing a password manager like Bitwarden, or even just NordPass or any of the other password managers that you could think of. Password managers are great because they will protect you from yourself. They'll protect you from reusing passwords, and that will prevent that credential stuffing attack that I mentioned earlier. You're going to want to also set up multi-factor authentication. You don't want to be in a situation where people gaining access to your account and you can't remove them. And fundamentally, if you've got multi-factor authentication, you're going to receive a text message if they were able to put in your credentials. And that will be a red flag that that's actually actionable. Okay. So just keep that in mind when you're thinking about cybersecurity, when you're thinking about protecting your data. You want to make sure you're using multi-factor authentication on all your accounts. The next one is don't access sensitive information in public. This is one of those things I think is very important because a lot of the time you may think you need to access your bank immediately. If you do, make sure you have a privacy screen. But I generally don't recommend accessing sensitive information in public. Every time you access sensitive information, you run the risk of getting your information stolen. People looking over your shoulder and accessing it. You want to make sure that people can't do that. They can't just look over your shoulder in order to access sensitive information. So I recommend either utilizing a privacy screen or just not accessing it in public. There's several ways you can protect yourself, and one way is to make sure you're not accessing private information in public. The next one is to make sure you check before you navigate to websites. I always know that people are going to want to watch the newest movie without paying. They're going to want to get games for free. I don't recommend doing that. a lot of those could be Trojan horses and other dangerous websites that can harvest your credentials. So you want to be really careful about clicking links that you don't know. So always verify that that link is a reputable source before you navigate to it. And finally, apply suspicion when somebody you don't know reaches out to you. A lot of the time it's malicious. Sometimes it's not, but it's up to you whether you want to take that chance or not. Okay, I don't recommend it because generally in those cases, it's usually a hack. And that's why it's important to make sure to apply suspicion. So today, you guys learned a lot about how to define cybersecurity in general. You learned a lot about AI, or artificial intelligence. You guys should be able to, you guys are going to be able to, after I show you, how to recognize common attacks against individuals and defend against them. And I want you guys all to implement the security best practices I just mentioned. Okay, and I'm going to show you a little bit more in relation to these things. And as a result, you guys are gonna, once we're done with these slides, you guys are gonna be able to see these things. Now, I'm gonna give you guys access to these slides. These are all the resources I use to be able to present these things to you, and I want you guys to have access to it. Okay. All of these things talk about the psychological principles that are utilized by hackers. And I want you guys, when you're done, after you leave today, to access the copy of the slides I'm sharing with you so you guys can see it. So with that, I'm going to quickly stop my screen share of the slides, and I'm going to pull up the examples that I have for you of these breaches. Okay. So one thing I want you guys to be aware of is that phishes come in many different shapes and sizes. And because of that, I want to make sure that you guys have at least seen them before we continue. So here is an example of a phishing email playing up on your sense of urgency. Okay. Now, this email specifically has that call to action. It's telling you that there's been an alert that's been triggered. And one thing you got to be careful of is that sometimes they will pose as security vendors. Now, here you could see in the top, right next to where it says Microsoft, it has, and I'm going to draw right under this, the address. Okay. Always check the address and make sure they're not using specific characters in order to make it seem like they're another website that they're not. I'm going to demonstrate how this exists in a second, but you always want to make sure you're checking to make sure the address is correct. Secondly, always bring your mouse over these buttons. That will show you the hyperlink they're leading you to. Okay. These buttons are very easy to create. It just requires utilizing HTML and CSS. So you always want to be careful when you see things like that. Lastly, going back to that principle I mentioned, don't access anything that you didn't ask for. If you didn't ask for alerts from Microsoft, don't open this email. Because one common tactic hackers also use is they will make the body an image and then put a link behind it. So even if you think that you're safe, you're not. Okay, so I want everyone to be clear about that. Anytime you get an email from a source you don't know, always apply skepticism. Okay, so moving on just a little, and let me just clear these drawings. We've got WhatsApp messages like this. Now, this message right here is a very common one where they're inviting you to join a group of other like-minded individuals. And they'll generally send this to tons of people they don't know. And the actual scam here is that they're going to drop links that are malicious. So if you ever receive an email like this, again, if you didn't ask for it, don't open it. Don't click the links. Don't join the group. This specific scam is very common in WhatsApp. And I want you guys to always make sure that when you're utilizing this, you're applying suspicion. And finally, we've got a text message right here. Now, again, same principles, especially if you're on an iPhone, this becomes very easy. At the top, you can see this is actually coming from an email. And that email seems very strange. I don't really trust that email. Okay. They mention a common bank, and they're saying that your card has been locked. Now, one thing to keep in mind is if your card has been locked, you can always check your bank app for that. You do not need to navigate to the website to access it. But when you see suspicious characters, a call to action like clicking the link, you always want to be suspicious and understand that these links are malicious. Okay. And as you can see, they're saying it's from Chase, but that website isn't Chase at all. Rebootsantamonica.com/JP Morgan. If I'm not mistaken, Chase's website is chase.com. I'm not sure, definitely check that. But it's important to realize that a lot of hackers are going to try to either appeal to authority, right? Play up on your urgency, and they'll attempt to get you to click links using things like that. Okay. Now that I've shown you these other examples, I'm going to actually show you, I'm going to stop my share, how a hacker can actually easily create an email like this. And I'm going to utilize, as I mentioned before, AI to do this. So I'm going to utilize ChatGPT in order to help me write the email. Okay. So I'm going to utilize ChatGPT to write the email. And I'm also going to utilize a tool called SE Toolkit to create a malicious link. Okay. So let me just share my screen once again. So welcome to my test email. I use this generally when I'm working with students. Okay. The entire reason why is because it's going to be a little bit risky to utilize my own email. Okay. Now, one thing I want you guys to pay attention to is the fact that when we write an email, it's actually possible to change the from when you're dealing with it. Now, Google has come a long way. They've made it so that you have to verify your account before you change the from. And as a result, I'm not actually going to change the from today. But I want you guys to always apply skepticism when you receive an email and check the recipient's name and address after they send an email. Okay. Now, I'm going to attempt to create a phishing email right now utilizing AI. But the first thing I'm going to do is begin by writing that call to urgency in my email here. So I'm going to write urgent, your account, your Gmail account. Let's use your OAuth login has been compromised. Okay. And now what I'm going to do is access my language model. Specifically, I'm utilizing ChatGPT here. And I'm going to ask it to tell me how specifically to write this email. So in the case of the email we're trying to make right now, I'm utilizing OAuth. So I'm going to say, you know, I have an OAuth application with Google that keeps locking out my customers. I want to email them a link that allows them to unlock it. Please help me write the and also with AI language models, you can also post a time frame. So you could say the client needs to do this in 24 hours. So there we built in that sense of urgency. We talked about a Google email client, which they might be using. And we also are trying to get them to think closely about how we want them to write it. So I'm gonna ask ChatGPT to help me write this. And once I do that, ChatGPT is going to start generating it. Now, normally it's pretty quick, but generally they're going to write this for you. Okay. Now, a lot of this information I could actually copy directly to the body of that email. And dangerously, ChatGPT didn't recognize that I was potentially using this for malicious purposes. So now I copy the entire body. I scroll all the way down. And I go back to my email client. And I paste it right here. Now, I mentioned in my email, and sometimes you may notice that the background comes in. That's fine. You just need to remove that using highlight. Let's use white. Oh, make this black actually. Black, there we go. Give me 1 second. I'm gonna repaste it. Pasting that stuff. There we go. So let me just make sure the background is black. And one thing to keep in mind is that when you do things like this, we can literally make the important thing bold. Okay. Now, mind you, by the way, this is a use case, so I don't want anyone trying this. But now that you see that I've created the email, now all I got to do is create that link. So for me, I'm going to drop the malicious link here. Let me actually utilize this button right here. And I want this to display www.google.com. And the web address will actually not be that. It's going to be from the malicious IP that I put over, that I just created on the left. I'm going to hit OK. And I'm just going to send this to myself so you guys can see how this appears. And as you can see, it looks like google.com. Now, the reason I warn you guys about checking the link is because if you don't know what the link is, right, it's very easy to click that link and put credentials into a malicious website. So let's say I click this link right here, and look, I've created a fake Google account right here. And the danger is that this email is not mine. Okay, this isn't an actual email I have password to. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to write, well, let's put a fake email, johnsmith@yahoo.com. No, let's use Gmail to make this consistent. And I'm going to put my password. Right? And the danger is now that I've just captured their password, as you can see right here. Okay, where is it? Right here. Which is exactly why you got to be really skeptical when it comes to links and emails, because it was incredibly easy to utilize a tool to emulate Google and get the password. So my last thoughts before I open this up for Q&A is to make sure that as individuals, we're paying close attention to the dangers of these emails and understand that AI makes this even easier to make this seem legitimate. And with that, thank you very much for your time, guys. I'd like to open the floor for questions.
Looks like a shy group.
Now, one thing to let you know is that, okay, so we have a question here. How much of this material is covered in the program? So this material specifically, what we did today, is going to be covered. The entire thing is going to be covered in the program, including the use of this tool right here. Now, the writing of that phishing email is not something that will probably be covered in, but actually the creation of this malicious link will be. And the idea is just so you understand the dangers that are associated with your phishing accounts and emails like that. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Okay, when it comes to emails, phone calls, etc., if you didn't ask for it, don't click it. And this is why. Any other questions, guys?
All right. Then I will pop back in to wrap things up. So I want to again thank everybody who zoomed in to join us today. If you have any further questions about Flatiron School, we will drop the link to schedule a chat with our amazing admissions team, of which Michael is a part. As a reminder, you will receive a copy of today's presentation within 3 business days after the event. And if you want to see any previous events, you can head on over to our YouTube channel and subscribe. Thank you again for attending and have a great rest of your day.
Before we go, Catherine,
Yeah,
I see a person with their hand up.
Oh,
If you have a question, feel free to write it in the chat. Being that this is the webinar Zoom, that's how you're going to want to ask your questions if you have your hand up. So definitely feel free to ask your questions. I just want to make sure I get to answer all your questions before we hop off. Okay, then guess not.
All right, then. Thank you very much again, Jill. Thank you, Michael. Have a great day, everybody.